When I asked for David's bio, he sent me a list of life accomplishments starting at 5 years old. So I'm just going to say that he's the president of the board of directors at Réseau, and head of the research committee at Réseau, and as well as a member of the scientific committee of Ibergay Intermittent Prep Study. Thank you very much for being here.
Hello. Well, thank you for sticking around in this heat, and I'm not going to complain about the heat because on April 15th there was still almost a foot of snow in our backyard. One of the life accomplishments, it wasn't actually life accomplishments, it was interesting experiences in my life, and one of them was getting used to living in a city where you go from winter to summer in literally 10 days. I don't know if people understand how rare that is in the world, but that's like extremely rare. Anyways, so we live in a very interesting climate. That aside, yes, I am presently president of the board of directors at Réseau, and I'd like to just take a brief opportunity to reassure everyone that it's financially sound these days. That being said, I'm a lawyer by profession. I actually work with people who are refugees and immigrants, mostly at the Montreal Chest Institute, which is about to be absorbed by an enormous tentacular building called the Glen site. I've worked with LGBT people from mostly from Central America and Southern America, some from Africa, some from Haiti. I've worked with an awful lot of African men and women who are coming out of La Francophonie countries of Africa. I have a premise about this. As a lawyer, it's really depressing to be a lawyer a lot of the times. And if I had to give my talk a title, I'd call it Yes But. And my yes but is that I think collectively agree that encouraging people, it's ACCM up there, encouraging people to be tested is a good idea, and I agree with that. My yes but is that I think that regulators and politicians and legislators in this country actually make it difficult for people because there are significant roadblocks that cause stigma, discrimination against people living with HIV, and those roadblocks are not coming down to keep up with what's happening with the science. The science is light years ahead, and the communities are light years ahead of where the legal environment is in Canada today. Now, I'm a 55-year-old man and I'm middle class, and so I actually don't hang out on rooftops in the summertime in Montreal. So this is going to look really staid by comparison, like I'm just not cool, so I'm sorry. There's no way I can control this from up here, right? No. Okay, so just change. I'm not gonna take you through this. I have way too many slides. So I want to just tell you very briefly that there's this philosophy that's coming out of BC and it's sweeping the world. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's perfect or it's great, but it's called treatment as prevention. The idea behind this is that if we can test as many people as possible and identify as many HIV positive people as possible and put them all on treatment and then make sure that they all stay adherent to treatment, then we can end the epidemic actually in pretty short order, like within terms of 30 years is what they're saying in BC. The problem with that is that people actually need support while they're taking treatment. You need life circumstances that allow you to be adherent to treatment, and treatment or testing positive isn't without consequences. So I think I shouldn't go through all this text. I think we should just, hang on, go back one, sorry. Involves widespread, yeah, no, I've already done that, so sorry, go ahead, next. Next again, sorry. If HIV testing can first be routinely offered to people from highly vulnerable communities and then over time expanded outwards to the general population, it might reduce the stigma or shyness associated with the test. This is one of the arguments that are advanced. I don't believe this. I don't believe it because of cultural issues, because of legal issues, because of economic consequences. And I think that until you reduce those roadblocks, it's a hard sell. And I think that those of us that work inside of HIV organizations, prevention organizations, or clinics, know what a hard sell it is, because we see the lifelong trajectory of people living with HIV, and we see the difficulties that they have along the way. So to sit there at a desk and really pitch HIV testing like it's a fun event and it's going to be really cool, and it's almost like, you know, diabetes, well, it's not quite from a legal point of view. And I often personalize this when I give talks, but I'm a diabetic. I got diabetes at age 14. I'm 55 today. It actually does have some consequences on your life. Living with a long-term chronic illness is not easy. And so I want to do the prevention, but I still feel that there's these unnecessary roadblocks in the way. So let's do some. Dropped to 75 or 80, then it was down to 50, now we're using 40, and there's a 20 that's coming along the way. So it pushes people to ever increasing levels of perfection. I actually think it's, from the little bit that I've been able to discern from reading some of the research, is that it's probable that you're probably not very infectious around 200, 300 even. And so I don't want to force people into a kind of algorithm that is almost impossible to conform to and is unnecessary. I want policy to reflect what the science actually says. So, okay, so we can go on. I talked a bit about stigma and discrimination. Oh yes, so okay. So inside social cultural communities, sometimes it can be really, really high. Sometimes, surprisingly, it's not that high. It has consequences in employment, life insurance, access to education, and I'm talking about inside of Quebec, criminal law, and immigration. So, lovely, cheery topics. Anyhow, so let's just go on. This is COXIDA's, the Quebec Coalition of AIDS Service Organizations, legal service. 39% of all the people that come to see the lawyers come to see them about discrimination-related issues. Insurance, employment, and discrimination. If we want to really convince people to get tested, we need to make sure that this slice of the pie gets smaller and smaller. And it needs to conform, as I said before, to what the science is really telling us. So, go on. So this is an example. This is actually the Public Institute of Health for Quebec. And what this says, for those who can't read French, it says, study for nothing, are you kidding? What this is about is it's aimed at medical students. They want students in medical faculties, including préposés aux bénéficiaires, nurses' aides, to contact public health. They want them to register themselves as HIV positive people with public health. The idea is that on a quote-unquote voluntary basis, they will be followed to make sure that they have undetectable viral load. In fact, what the program provided in its original format, and I don't know if it's been changed yet, but this is only a year or so ago, it provided that if you were studying in a CEGEP, that the school would be informed of your HIV status. Implied in this is kind of a threat that you wouldn't be able to take certain courses. They don't want people who are surgeons and who are HIV positive. My question about this is, let's look at the epidemiology. How many people who work in medicine and medical fields are actually infecting patients who are HIV positive? I don't think you can find any proof of it from an epidemiological point of view. This is about managing crises in public health, or in the media. Some of you will remember the doctor who had worked in Uganda for many years as a surgeon, and who became a surgeon at Saint-Justine Hospital with children in Montreal. She ended up testing HIV positive. It got out into the media, and they tested thousands of patients, and they didn't find a single infection. And every time we find a healthcare professional who ends up testing HIV positive and it gets out into the media, we react this way. Hospital administrators get together, they issue a notice, they go through all the files, they test all the people, and guess what? Nobody ever gets infected. There is a case with hepatitis in Toronto, where a dentist, in suburban Toronto, where a dentist infected about 200 patients. So I need to qualify that. But that was hepatitis, it wasn't HIV. Anyways, next. I've talked about this before in some other circumstances, and so some people have seen these slides, and so to them I apologize. It's a bit of a repetition. But I have a close friend who's studying at the Quebec Institute of Tourisme and Hotellerie, essentially the provincial kind of cégep college for tourism studies. It's a really ugly building that was kind of refitted to look just a little bit less ugly, and it's at the Sherbrooke Metro. So when you come out of the Sherbrooke Metro, you come out underneath it, but you can get really good food and really good service inside. This says, this was at the bottom of the individual's acceptance letter when they were accepted into the school. It says, the Institute advises that, all candidates, all admission candidates, that all programs, all, not some, are incompatible with the fact of living with an infectious illness because of the risks that come from manipulating food with sharp objects. So nobody who works in a kitchen in Quebec should be HIV positive. That's what that means. This is Quebec in 2014, not 1994. And how this got under the wire of the Human Rights Commission is absolutely beyond me. But it's truly shocking. If we're talking, I mean, hepatitis C, even hepatitis C today, we have a cure for hepatitis C. Hepatitis A and B, we have vaccines. You could have a policy where you ask people to get vaccinated as they were coming in. Ask them to get tested. If they test positive for hepatitis C, I suppose you could refer them to test, or to the new treatments which cure 80% of hepatitis C's. But don't tell them that they can't go to any courses at all. In the case of that college is divided into 3 sections. One is kitchens, one is hotel management and convention management, and one is to be a sommelier, to be an expert in wine. As far as I can see, only 2 out of those 3 involve sharp objects. I mean, get real. Just let's get real. Anyway, sorry. Next. Dentists. So Coxida did a study in 2012. They found that 4% of dentists in Montreal outright refuse all HIV positive people. Now this is a glass half empty, glass half full thing. The good thing is that 96% of people do accept HIV positive people. However, 10% impose special conditions that say you have to come as the very last patient at the end of the day. And a lot of my clients that I see at the hospital work long impossible hours in industry, and coming at being told that they only have 1 time slot to see the dentist is difficult. Again, I would say to you that policy has to be based on epidemiology. Show me that patients are infecting dentists in North America, and I will respond and say, okay, we need to do something. I don't think you can show us that. Anyway, next. Yeah, so I put up here, rest in peace, 83 years old. For those of you that don't know, this is Recoleta Cemetery in Buenos Aires. It's full of cats, and I think it would be amazing to walk you through it on a foggy day. That being, these are tombs, individual tombs. Why did I put death up on this? It's because a 20-year-old gay man in Vancouver today who contracts HIV has an additional life expectancy, quality of life year expectancy, of 63.5 years. That's 83.5 years of quality of life. And then at the end, there'll be a couple of crappy years of life on top of that. This guy is going to live today to be 85 or 86. That's significantly longer than my grandparents' generation, my parents' generation, or even hell, my generation. So when we work in prevention work today, I really think we need to change our entire language. We talk about risk behavior, the risk of contracting HIV. What? The risk of living to be 83.5? I should be so lucky. Now, I don't want to just downplay the importance of of the consequences of living with a chronic infectious disease. It's not easy, I said that before. But I really think we need to give careful thought to redefining how we describe risk and how we constantly talk about risk and HIV as if it's this big scary thing, because in fact that language is just rebounding off the community today. Nobody is reacting to that anymore. Next, insurance. So if this person's going to live an extra 63.5 years, why is it so damn difficult to get life insurance? I went on the internet a couple of weeks ago and I looked to see what kind of life insurance can I buy. You can get those life insurance policies with no medical questions asked for people who are HIV positive. You can get them, but they're expensive and they give small amounts of benefits. It's essentially treating HIV positive people as if they were 67 years old. I don't think, again, that the statistics support this. I saw a study from London that says that at least 50% of people living with HIV should be able to qualify easily for life insurance today. Sorry, next. So I said, So, do you think you can live without life insurance in Quebec? Think again if you're going to buy a house or a condominium. Your hypothèque has to be insured by life insurance. The bank wants you to get life insurance, and that bloody life insurance gets renewed every 5 years. So my advice for years has been to say to people, get your economic affairs in order. If you think that there's a possibility you might be positive, or you think that you're in a trajectory right now where you're at risk of being becoming positive, get your economic affairs in order before you go for testing. And by the way, I would say get on to PrEP. Anyhow, so that's just fun. So what is insurance used for? It's used to guarantee a mortgage. If you're in a partnership, and if you're an accountant or a lawyer, auditors, people that work in kind of collective partnership offices, they need life insurance to insure their share of the business so that their associates can buy it out when they die. It can be used to secure a line of credit. It can protect your business from monetary loss. It can provide employee benefits, and it can be used as an employee benefit, and many other uses in financial management. So if you're middle class, the inability to procure life insurance is a really big deal. Sorry, next. Group health and drug insurance. People are afraid when they work in small companies with 50 or 60 employees that if they are going to cost the collective group insurance policy $15,000 or $16,000 a year in drug costs, that it's going to drive the premiums up. And guess what? In the next round of contractions and layoffs, guess who gets laid off? Because gossip travels like crazy in environments like that, and people do find out. And that's why you see at Coxida, out of those 200 people who come in every year, and that's not a service that's heavily advertised, 40% of them are coming in for insurance and discrimination issues. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, that's fine, we can go on. Immigration. The basic policy in Canada is that if you live with a chronic illness, and that illness is going to cost you more than the average Canadian walking out there on the street tonight, and that's about $6,700 a year in health and social services costs. If you're going to cost more than that, you are inadmissible to immigrate to this country. There is a wall, a solid wall between you and Canada. There are only a few exceptions to be able to find your way through that wall. Small little doors. One is to make a refugee claim and get accepted. The other is to fall in love and find somebody who's a permanent resident or a Canadian citizen who will sponsor you. And the problem is that the government is shortening down the times of visas and shortening down the delay to actually claim refugee status. So it gets harder and harder to actually find somebody to fall in love with and make a sponsorship claim. And the third is a humanitarian request for humanitarian and compassionate motives. That works well if you come from a place like Haiti or Chad or Mali, Afghanistan, a place where HIV treatment really isn't easily available. What I do when I work with people from Mexico or from Latin American countries today is I try to do a hybrid, and if the person has mental health issues where they need episodically to see a psychologist, or if they're on antipsychotic drugs, or if they have dementia, or anything like that, you look not only to see what is the state of HIV care in the home country, but also maybe what is the state of care for hypertension, diabetes, mental health, etc. Sometimes what's available are 1 or 2 lines of antiretrovirals, but there's not much depth in the quality of care. But it's a long and difficult application to write. Many lawyers abuse their clients by taking a lot of money and doing a minimum amount of work. And the success rate is not overly high. Next. Yeah, okay, I did that, sorry. Yeah, okay, this is worth mentioning really briefly. And that is just that the language that the drug program uses, for accessing antiretrovirals, the Federal Interim Health Insurance Policy for Refugees, talks about making people who have lost their refugee claim, they contract what they're eligible for in terms of medical care and in terms of drugs. And they limit it to people who are a danger to public health. Think about that. The language, a danger to public health. You're going to infect people with a disease and they're going to live to be 86, but you're a danger to public health. This is like breathtaking. Again, I think it's stupid, it doesn't conform to the reality, and by the way, the Obama administration in the US lifted most of the immigration restrictions for HIV positive people several years ago. This country is much more conservative today than the USA is. Next. Students get caught with this all the time. You come to Canada with a student visa, you're studying at Concordia. If you're a foreign student, Concordia, McGill, Université de Montréal will have a collective drug insurance policy, a collective health insurance policy for graduate students. But what happens is that they're capped. They're limited at about $10,000 for drug costs. And an HIV positive person will run through that money in 9 months. So at best it buys them at least 1 year, and then they're up the paddle without a creek. So if you know somebody who's a student, who's thinking about maybe getting tested, I think they should be tested for their health. They need to know. But the consequences for their stay in Canada can be quite drastic. And the student, if they want to renew their visa and stay on beyond 3 years, immigration will test them. And it's not consent, voluntary consent. It's if you want to stay in the country, you must be tested. We are testing virtually all immigrants today that are coming here. Okay, sorry. So I kind of made a table of all of this crap. And essentially, this shows you the contrast between where the science and the health is and where the policy is. So we say that undetectable viral load vastly reduces the risk of transmission in almost all cases. And yet criminal law says, in order to have sex with somebody and not disclose your status, you must have both undetectable viral load and use a condom. That's kind of like double protection. I think it would be good as a public health policy. I think it would be good as a prevention policy, but I don't think we should be sending people to jail for 6 or 7 years because they met on Grindr or Scruff, and the guy in Quebec City whose moniker on Grindr was BB Steve, for Bareback Steve. I mean, I don't know what universe people in Quebec City are living in, but they're certainly not living in mine. I would have known what that meant, but maybe that's because I'm Anglophone. We say that high CD4 counts and undetectable viral load translate into long life expectancy, and yet it's really difficult, almost impossible to get life insurance. We say that the side effects of antiretrovirals today are almost nil, that they have very few. But when I've talked to some clinicians at the hospital, because I've thought that some patients' spouses would be good candidates for PrEP, the clinicians drag out this language about giving people toxic drugs. Well, are the drugs toxic or are they not? We need to, again, be well-founded in our science. Next, sorry. Human rights law, undetectable viral load, and the prudent practice of universal precautions make it illegal to discriminate against people living with HIV. But again, I go back to the Coxida statistics. There's lots of employment discrimination that's going on in the marketplace. I have clients that I see at the hospital who are being told in Centre Emploi Québec that they should not choose to go into healthcare studies in CEGEP because if they're HIV positive, they won't get a job. Finally, down here, treatment as prevention, the steady state of HIV transmission amongst MSM, men who have sex with men, is so high that we really need to push testing and get everybody on treatment. But what's the cost? The cost, if you look at, for example, I think if you have somebody who has undetectable viral load and they're making love without a condom, and they've had undetectable viral load for the last 2 years, they don't have a sexually transmitted infection, and they're having condomless sex with a partner who's on PrEP, I think you have more chance of meeting a Martian on St. Catherine Street next Saturday than being infected with HIV. I really do. I think that's where we are. I think that's where the science is today. And yet, how much do we pay for those drugs? We pay, I think Truvada is $28 a pill, which would be a bargain if we were living in the States. So we're looking at something around $11,000 or $12,000 a year. It's going to come off patent very, very soon. In the next couple of years in Canada, the 2 ingredients are coming off of patent. When it does, according to our lovely policy here, we will give the generic company 60% of the pre-patent expiry costs. Now let's think about this for a second. Truvada is the single most prescribed and consumed antiretroviral in the world. Millions of copies have to be made every day to supply that quantity of demand. At millions of copies per day, the per pill production cost is about 2 cents. We're going to pay, after it comes off patent in Canada, $20 for the bloody pill. That's a 2,000% return on basic production costs. Now, I know they have executives, I know they have marketing, I know they have to pay for a lot of heat in Montreal in winter, which begins in November and ends in May, but I would have to say, this is a policy decision. It has nothing to do with reality. It's because the supreme value in Canadian society is maximizing private shareholder return. It trumps public health and it trumps human rights. There's no reason why, given the public health emergency amongst MSM, that pill shouldn't be used, or the government shouldn't order that pill to be produced, and be produced at, I don't know, $4, $6, even 10, but not 20. Sorry, I'm on a soapbox. Next. So mobilizing the troops. So this goes back to my point. I'm just basically saying that people that work in HIV community-based organizations would have an easier job of selling testing if we could know that these policies are being changed to reflect scientific reality. Next. Canadian Medical Association. Physicians have an obligation to inform patients that when the patient's information flows into an electronic health record, the physician cannot control access or guarantee confidentiality. Lawyers are starting to put this at that little warning at the end of their email saying, we can't guarantee you that information going by the internet is private anymore. And we have Edward Snowden to thank for telling us this. I mean, you know, the Canadian government broke into Embraer's offices in Brazil and they stole, you know, corporate secrets about how to build jets and then gave it back to the shareholders of Bombardier and McDonnell Douglas in Canada. The USA vacuumed up 70 million phone calls in France in 1 month a couple of years ago. I had a personal experience which was interesting a couple of weeks ago. No, maybe more than that. At the end of the winter, I got the flu. Okay, I see I've got 5 minutes. At the end of the winter, I got the flu. I had the flu for about 5 days. I felt like total crap. And I came home from work one day with a huge headache, aches and pains, started to feel nauseous, sat down at dinner time, and ate my dinner. I took my insulin as a diabetic, and then promptly started to throw up. And I threw up, and I threw up, and I couldn't keep anything down. So at 4 o'clock in the morning, I went to emergency at Notre Dame. 2 weeks before, I had had STI testing done in a clinic. And my bed was right at the base of where the nurse's station was in the hospital. And at one point, the doctor who was in charge of emergency came up to me and he said, I saw all those test results, all the analyses on the computer, and everything's all right. And I thought at first he was talking about my diabetes blood test results. And the nurses kind of laughed. And they realized that I didn't understand what he was talking about. And he said to me, he said, oh no, he said, all those STI tests, all those STD tests that you had done, he said, I thought it was better to tell you when your spouse wasn't here. That shows you how fluid computerized information is in 2015. It's true that we scramble information about STD testing. This is true. We do. You can't identify it. It gets a code. We don't keep nominative lists of who's HIV positive. But as soon as somebody has a viral load test done, that's not governed by the same rules. So I don't know what protections are in place in the computerized system, but I would say in the world of post-Edward Snowden, we should be actually quite worried. Sorry, next. I don't think we need to worry about this. Just, we can skip here. Oh, that's important. Go back, sorry, the red stuff. Go here. So as far as testing goes, I don't mean to rain on people's parade, but you actually have the right to say no. Don't ever forget that. Consent is written into the Quebec Human Rights Act, it's written into the health law, it's in the Code of Deontology of Physicians and Nurses. You have the right to say no. Next. For those of us that are doing prevention, it's becoming really hard to find our audience, because our audience is more and more connecting via telephone applications and via the internet. It's a virtual space, it's not a physical space. Next. I think unresolved issues, well, we talked a lot about home testing today. I'm of an older generation, and I think psychologists at the hospital will tell you that when you get tested and you're announced a positive result, that you probably only retain about 15% of what's actually said to you at that initial meeting. I think it's important to have an empathetic contact with a human being that will want to draw you back to the hospital or the clinic a second time to be able to ask more questions. Otherwise, you're lost to follow-up. But I'm old-fashioned, and maybe it's not so important to the younger generation. Starting treatment immediately, benefits for whom? Most people, when they start treatment, actually, when they're tested positive, their CD4 counts are down around 350, and there's no question that if you start treatment at that level, it's beneficial. But if you're up around 550, and we're talking about maybe only 5% of people, the benefits are much, much weaker. And I think that a person, as I said before, you have the right to say no, and I think that from even a medical point of view, there's some literature now that is beginning to show that there's a clinical benefit in terms of the sort of medical conditions that surround HIV but are not necessarily directly caused by HIV. So the kidney failure rates are lower, cardiac and cardiovascular disease is lower because there's less inflammation, etc. But be aware of the fact that the higher your CD4 count is, the less it's actually immediately urgent. I don't think the science is 100% certain on that. I think it's about 90% certain. We're getting close to it, but anyhow. Next. We can just go on, sorry. Yes, Réseau. Réseau has a Project Spot, an anonymous testing clinic in Montreal. I think this is what I'll just end here and then we'll wrap up. But what I wanted to say about that is that for a long time we've moved away from anonymous testing. We haven't done a very good job of promoting it. And what I find fascinating about Spot is we open up a place for anonymous testing. It was actually within the framework of a research cohort. And guess what? People come. We see, 4 people a day, 5 people a day, but times 200 days a year when you're open, and suddenly you're up into, 800 tests a year, possibly, or maybe even just 550 to 800 a year, in a community whose total population is probably not much more than about, I don't think it's 100,000, frankly, of MSM in Montreal. So that's a significant slice of the population, enough to make a difference. And Réseau tests people in our offices in community testing clinics, and every single clinic we're obliged to turn people away. Why? Because it's a medical act in Quebec and you need a nurse or a doctor to do it. If we could get people from the community to take a quick certificate course at Cégep du Vieux-Montréal, we could have an army of testers out there and increase our testing. The demand is certainly there. We're being bottlenecked by the costs in the healthcare system. Despite the fact that it costs over a lifetime a lot of money to treat somebody who's HIV. And in theory, people who know that they're HIV positive will tend to adhere to antiretroviral therapy, achieve undetectable viral load, maybe be more inclined to use condoms, and therefore lower overall infection rates. So that's my take on testing. I think it's a good idea. I think governments, I think public health, I think healthcare needs to wake up and smell the roses and realize that the reality of 1995 has changed. I think we need to be ever vigilant about discrimination and screening criteria that are put in place not because of health, but for the administrative convenience of people who don't want to be in the media. I think this is what you're seeing at the Institut de Tourisme et Hôtellerie du Québec. I think it's what you're seeing with the medical students in various faculties. And I think that everything needs to go back to what are the real risks of infection. So, thank you.
So, thank you, David.